Welcome to episode 179 of the Disorganized Wizards Club podcast. My name is Alex. I'm joined as always by Adam.
Hello.
And Cam.
Hello, hello.
And we're a group of Ottawa-based players that play just about anything and everything we can qualify for. We talk about decks, tournament stories, just about anything to help you and ourselves get better at Magic.
Hopefully, almost certainly. We're out here trying. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, eventful week for us this past week. DWC Take Our Money happened this past Saturday, taken down by friend of the show, Shane, playing Green Red Fires. Cam, you had a pretty sick run in that event as well. Want to talk a little bit about your tournament?
So couldn't quite run back the victory I had in the first Take Our Money, but I got as close as possible. I lost to Shane in the finals. Leading up to the tournament, I was trying to find a deck that I thought was good that I could play that didn't have Fires of Invention in it, because I didn't really want to do that to people. So instead, I picked the goofiest Fires deck I could find, and it was an Esper control deck, playing 4 Fires as its only red cards, and a bolus and some red cards in the sideboard to wish for. But yeah, just a big Yorion pile, bunch of random Esper cards, and turns out that just flickering things with Yorion in any colors is really strong. It carried me into the finals, where I lost against Shane. I actually lost to him once before in the tournament as well. He was both of my losses, the only person I lost to. And I think that's just because the Green Red Fires deck has a pretty good matchup against the other Yorion Fires decks.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Also, this was our first event that we ran as a double elimination tournament instead of the traditional Swiss pairing with cut to top 8. How did you guys find playing in a double elimination tournament?
I enjoyed it, actually. I thought it was pretty cool. It kind of felt like it went long in some ways, but not longer than a top 8 would have been probably. And it was kind of cool to just know you were done and not have to sweat breakers or anything. That part was pretty nice.
Yeah. It ended up being the same amount of rounds total as if we had done Swiss. It was 9 rounds, which for the amount of people we had would have been 6 rounds of Swiss and 3 rounds of top 8. So I think it's the same there. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have, it didn't feel different to me because I didn't get eliminated early. So I don't really have an opinion.
Yeah, rub it in, Cam. Rub it in. I think if anything, top 8 might be better, if only because maybe not for the Take Our Money, because it's a casual series where we're just giving away, 50 US for free to somebody who beats us, but yeah, I think in other tournaments like the organization, there's a certain prestige to top 8 that makes it feel good just from Magic tradition. But yeah, it was okay.
Yeah,
I think I still prefer Swiss in general because I was thinking about this afterwards. If you 3-2 or 4-2, you're dead in a double elimination. But in certain tournament sizes, a 4-2 can top 8 and that person might win. So I kind of like the reset between rounds, makes it, I don't know, gives you a bit more leeway. But for a small prize sort of quick tournament, the double elimination was quite nice.
All right. And speaking of events, in a bit over a week's time, we have the next DWC organizational, number 4, the Ikoria Championship. May 17th, Sunday at noon Eastern Time. First place is a box of Ikoria Lair of Behemoths. And this time, the Wizards Tower has bumped up the prizes for the event. Great sponsor of the show and great sponsor of our events. And we have prizes for the top 16 in Wizards Tower store credit. So that's going to be really exciting. If you want to sign up, you can sign up at MTG Melee if you search us up there, or we'll have the link to the tournament in the show notes as well. The event is free to enter. So if you have nothing going on Sunday, might as well play in a free event, maybe win some prizes. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be covering the whole event over at twitch.tv/Disorganized Wizards Club.
And if you do have something going on Sunday, cancel it. Come play our.
Yeah. And we've stepped up our coverage for this event this time around. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Really looking forward to covering it.
Yeah, what are we going to wear? Ties? No, I'm just kidding. The new video setup we have for hand viewer looks sick. Our coverage might be better than official WotC coverage for Arena at this point.
I'm willing to say it.
Yeah, I think it is. And speaking of that new coverage, last night was our first episode, our premiere episode of DWC Versus, where we just battle each other with some standard decks, talk about how the matchups play out, talk about sideboard strategies, etc. And we used our new setup for the first time. You could see both players' hands as we displayed the games. So if you want to see what that looked like, you can go check out the VOD on Twitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it felt like the video quality, we did some recent upgrades, so it feels like the sound and video quality were way better for 3 people in there. It was really good. I can't wait to cast because of it. I might just even dress nice like a caster, Maybe I'll wear a tie. Who knows?
Yeah, stay tuned. We'll find out. But yeah, if you want to check out DWC Versus, it's our new show on our Twitch channel. Again, twitch.tv/disorganized Wizards Club. We're going to be doing it every single Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. So mark your calendars. Come hang out for DWC Versus. If you're a member of our Discord, we have a specific channel there now where people can post brews or decks they like, and maybe we'll pick it to play on the show. So check that out. And yeah,
we should make it even more competitive between the three of us for the challenge series, for the versus series. If you can win through brews, like huge bragging rights, like we got to, we're out here trying to win.
Yeah, we can figure out something sweet like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of sweet brews at DWC Versus, I'm super happy about the deck I brought. Yeah, I came up with like a Karuga brew playing Lovestruck Beast and Hunted Nightmare. And the first I row in games to make a nice mix of humans and non-humans, and then playing Of One Mind as just a 1-mana draw too. For an aggro deck, it drew way more cards than I think I've ever seen an aggro deck draw.
Yeah, Of One Mind was really, really impressive in your deck. It was always just a 1-mana draw too.
Yeah, there was one time I forgot it wasn't and messed up and spent my whole turn accidentally instead of doing something else. But yeah, like as long as you set it up properly, you like always have cards. So it was really fun. The link is the link to the deck list is in our Discord.
So yeah, pretty exciting last week for us. And also we have a bunch of standard decks to talk about. The breakout deck of this past weekend in standard, which it has really just completely taken over the format. And I mean, I think it's safe to say now that this deck is the best deck in standard. Jeskai Lukka Fires, with playing Yorion as a companion, took down the Magic Fest Online Grand Prix event, and it put a total of 7 copies across the past 2 standard challenges in top 8s on Moto.
That's a lot of representation for a standard deck.
Yeah, it's been dominating on ladder, dominating these premier events. And we played it last night in the DWC Versus event, and it felt really, really good. Like the matchup we played, Cam, when you were playing the Obosh aggro deck versus Jeskai Lukka, it almost felt at one point like the Jeskai deck could just cast a spell at random every turn and still win pretty convincingly.
Yeah, like for a mid-rangey sort of combo deck, the cards it uses to set up for its combo, things like Birth of Melodus, things like Omen of the Sun, are incidentally just extremely hard for aggro decks to deal with. They just make blockers that you can't attack past, or they make 1/1s that trade with a lot of creatures out of Obosh decks, and they gain life while they do it. You have Teferi to just like disrupt the plan, and then your sort of big haymakers that these decks rely on, be it things like Mayhem Devil in the sack decks, or Heraldic Banner, or Obosh itself, they all get ECD'd. So then you're stuck playing with like these kind of 1-drops. And then there's Wraths floating around. Like that's something I noticed about these Yorion decks, is that because there's extra cards in them, they have answers to everything. And because they have a lot of filtering, they can kind of find something to do in every scenario that's very good. So when they draw super hot, like other decks have no chance.
Yeah, exactly. And so across this top 8 of the Magic Fest Online from this past weekend, like I mentioned, Jeskai Lukka took down the event, but it also had 3 copies total across the entire top 8. Second place in the event was Boros Cycling. The player who took second decided to get rid of the clunky Jeskai mana base, go straight Boros, play a low land count. Adam actually played this deck last night in DWC Versus. How did you like the Boros Cycling deck, Adam?
I'll talk about it more in a bit too, but I think it was a big improvement. So at the Take Our Money event, I played the Jeskai Cycling deck, and the mana is too much in that deck. It's trying to do too much. So, and I thought that immediately when I played the deck. I didn't test for the Take Our Money. I just wanted to try that deck, so I fired it up. And it's kind of weird to play, but yeah, the Jeskai version, the mana felt a lot clunkier, whereas Boros feels a lot smoother. There are still problems and issues with the deck, but overall, yeah, I mean, it's pretty powerful. It's sort of just, you cycle and Zenith Flare them. There's not a lot. Well, there is something to it, which I'll talk about in a bit, but yeah, it's like an interesting deck. But yeah, definitely cutting or switching from Jeskai to Boros, definitely an improvement in the deck, in my opinion.
Third and fourth place in the Magic Fest Online were held by the same deck, and it looks like the exact same 75. This is Teamer Adventures. And Teamer Adventures, I think it top aided the Magic Fest Online the week before. One copy. And actually, I like this new build of it, playing a one of Lukka Coppercoat Outcast in the flex slot, so you can turn your smaller adventure creatures into a giant beanstalk giant whenever you want, which is pretty interesting. But
That's cool because, like, I keep forgetting that Lukka has that text about the creature you hit having to cost more. So because so much of this deck is 3 drops and then phase 2 and Edgewelling Keepers 1, yeah, you just roll any of your 3 drops into beanstalk giants. That's super cool.
And I've heard rumblings that Teamer Adventure posts a positive matchup versus the Jeskai Lukka decks. I don't know how true that is. I haven't actually had any games under my belt between the two strategies, but 2 copies of the deck in the top 4, I mean, there's pretty good odds that they had to play against one of the other 2 Jeskai Lukka decks that finished 5th through 8th in the quarterfinals. So it could be true. And I mean, they were bound to have run into the strategy during the Swiss. It kind of makes sense to me thinking about it, how the matchups would play out, that the adventure decks would be just generally better versus the Lukka Agent of Treachery strategy, as like you don't really care about any of your permanents getting stolen because you just have Brazen Borrowers to pick them back up. And you spend most of your early game just putting as many lands into play as possible. So having an agent early stealing one of your lands isn't as backbreaking as it would be versus other decks in the format. So it kind of just makes sense to me that adventures would be well set up to fight the Lukka strategies.
Yeah, no doubt. That seems like a really accurate assessment to me that, you know, as long as you have those like early beanstalk giants, like if you have this sort of dream of Clover into beanstalk giant, you're kind of set up from agent. From there, you can just play your game and you're not really too worried about agent. You don't just auto lose to it, right? Like you're kind of ahead now. You're just going to cast all your spells. Nothing they really agent you care about. Yeah, that seems like, yeah, it might be really well positioned to beat them because of that.
I like your point about petty theft, the spell on Brazen Borrower being able to reclaim the things you steal, because these Fires decks, like all of their power and basically how they win is by leveraging like massive turn 4, 5, and 6. But if they have to play beyond that, outside of flickering things like Narset or like maybe blinking a bunch of omens, they don't have a bunch of card draw inherently. Almost not as much as this adventure deck has. So if you can mitigate the damage and survive past like Fire's turn 5 by reclaiming maybe the thing they stole, or Disdainful Stroke is very good against them because they can't just pay for it like Mystical Dispute that most people are playing. But if you can get past those turns, you're going to have more resources than them, and they're going to almost be hamstrung by their own Fires.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're having issues playing against Jeskai Lukka decks on ladder right now, maybe Teamer Adventures is where you want to be. Also, across this top 8, we had 1 copy of Bantiorian. This deck has been pretty consistently just putting 1 copy into every single top 8 across most events. Not much innovation in this deck. Everything is pretty stock at this point. Then closing out 5th through 8th, we have 1 Obosh Rakdos aggro deck and 1 Teamer Reclamation. Again, both these decks pretty stock. Teamer Rec still putting up results.
Yeah, but a lot less of them. It's starting to creep down, right?
Yeah, everybody's like you talked about last week, kind of following its natural course as it has in past standard formats, really good early on and slowly falling out of favor as decks get more tuned.
Yeah, the thing is, you know, like the aggro decks can push this kind of deck out, but it doesn't feel like they can push out the Lukka decks as easily. And so you probably will see a decline in rec decks simply because they don't have the kind of game that you were talking about that Jeskai Lukka has, right? Where it's able to just pound those aggressive decks. Whereas Wilderness Rec can lose those decks really easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Also, I mean, one of the biggest stories I'd say from this top 8, aside from the 3 Jeskai Lukka decks, is there's no just regular Jeskai Fires with Karuga as your companion in this top 8, which might be the first time since Ikoria came out.
Yeah, well, we also kind of thought about that too. We thought, well, we hoped even that it wouldn't be the case that it just stayed that way. Because again, it was similar in other seasons where Fires was a lot more dominant. Fires won't go anywhere though, it'll be back. But Teamer Rec probably won't see the level of dominance it did, but Fires will stick around, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's sort of, the typical old Jeskai Fires deck probably just doesn't hold up to the value engine generated by something like Yorion.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Lukka Yorion Fires decks just prey upon the Karuga Fires decks. Getting quick agents over and over seems devastating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, how are you beating that?
Yeah. Yeah, that wraps up the Magic Fest Online weekly championship top 8.
Yeah, so some of the decks might be able to do it. There were certain sideboard cards that were really effective, though, versus Yorion and Lukka, it felt like. Like Grafdigger's Cage was incredible, hey? When we were playing?
It was surprisingly annoying.
Yeah, I couldn't believe how much time it bought me.
Yeah, no, totally. In the match we played. I mean, one match, I think it went on an additional 10 turns just because of a Grafdigger's Cage where the game ended immediately.
I had nothing else, and I was just bricking, and my draws were horrendous, and it still was close because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure you come packing Cages if you're trying to beat that deck, because that deck's everywhere. Mm. And Cage is just good right now anyway, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, kind of across the format as a whole now, we've really seen these Yorion decks picking up a lot of steam behind them and really dominating the format. I guess from this point, what would be your guys' immediate thoughts of where to go to tackle all these Yorion mid-range piles?
I don't know if you can race it from a mid-range perspective. It might be, I think I wouldn't be surprised if a control deck emerges now that we sort of know the things you have to answer. And you see like linear weakness in the Lukka decks getting shut down by something like Grafdigger's Cage. So that means that control has a window to position itself in its build to be able to combat things. I don't know that they have the pieces and tools to stop that kind of value generation, but it's possible that you start seeing sort of more controlling builds come out of this.
Yeah. I tried for like quite a while one day, and I was getting frustrated trying to think of like how to attack the different Fires decks in the format, being able to deal with basically the Yorion decks. And because of this thing I mentioned, with due to having 20 extra cards, they sort of already have answers for everything. There isn't a clear like way to attack them. Like if you try and play creatures, they have wraths. If you try and play counterspells, they have Teferi. If you try and ramp, they have Fires, which ramps faster. Like they can kind of potentially outdo you in every way. So I think another avenue of attack is to just sort of ignore what they can answer and hope to prey on the slightly more inconsistent draws that they have because they're playing 80 cards with some sort of like linear aggressive strategy, presumably one that gets around the wraths or isn't as worried about the wraths. But I think just linear powerful strategies, kind of like what the Fires decks are themselves, could contest them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have no idea what that strategy is. I'm going to try in the next couple days, or maybe for the next DWC Versus, to brew some like combo kill Yorion deck. Because right now all the Yorion decks are like value generation Yorion turns. Like they flicker ECDs or they flicker Omen of the Seas. But is there like some way to flicker a bunch of stuff that just like makes a bunch of damage and kills your opponent? Can I just like spend my early turns playing aggressive and setting up for that and then kill them with Yorion?
Maybe. Anything is possible.
Yeah, who knows?
We have a very big card pool to work from right now, so there's probably something we're not thinking of.
As down as I was on brewing in this format, feeling like the companions are really restrictive, feeling like not much is worth trying to brew because it can't keep up with Fires, there's more room than I initially thought for like wacky ideas. Different types of decks keep emerging. Like I was able to come up with something pretty interesting. So it's not as doom and gloom as I thought it was.
Yeah, I agree there. And while like most decks in the format are companion decks, there are a lot of differences across various strategies, even if they are playing the same companion, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like there's so many Yorion decks, but a lot of them feel like pretty different.
So to wrap up talking about top 8s from the past week, I wanted to touch quickly on the most recent Pioneer Super Qualifier top 8 from MTGO. We don't talk about Pioneer too often on this cast, but I was looking through the top 8 lists here, and just a lot of really sweet things going on right now, I think, in Pioneer. We had 7 different archetypes across the top 8. The whole event was taken down by Red White Burn, which plays Lurrus as a companion. I guess we should preface this top 8 by saying all 8 decks are companion decks, which at this point I don't think really surprises anybody. The companions have just completely taken over the non-rotating formats. Red White Burn has really emerged as a top contender for best deck in the format in Pioneer at the moment. Just a pretty straightforward aggro deck with Swift Sphere, Soulscar Mage, get 2 Lava Runners, Eidolon of the Great Revel, Bayashino Pyromancer featuring burn spells. Second place in this event was an interesting one, Featherless Feather, or I guess you would now just call it Red White Prowess. Playing a bunch of heroic creatures and prowess creatures alongside pump spells, and we don't have Feather anymore because this is now a Lurrus deck. The value of Feather just can't quite compete with the value of Lurrus. This one's a cool iteration on the red white Feather archetype, I think.
Yeah, that deck's pretty sweet. I think it's probably really good in Pioneer where, this sort of aggressive start, you can just probably run over the sort of combo decks, right? This stops a lot of the linear Goldfish decks probably because it can kill them in time. You have some recursion and late game value if you need it with Lurrus. Yeah, this deck seems really strong.
Yeah.
Gird for Battle, I can't believe it. I mean, I can. That card's wild, but heroic. But
it's just really interesting to think about how like the Red White Feather deck was a deck that already existed in Pioneer, but now that you don't have to play Feather anymore, the deck's just a lot less clunky and a lot more low to the ground and aggressive, which just turns out is a lot better.
We could still call it Feather, just like Affinity is still called Affinity, even though none of its cards have Affinity for artifacts.
Yeah, that's true. Moving down, a really sweet deck in this top 8, third place. I guess this is just Jeskai Lukka Fires playing Yorion as a companion, ported over to Pioneer.
Yeah, a lot of the cards are still like standard staples. You still have like Narset 3, Teferi 3, Lukka. Your agents are still there. But it picks up things like Supreme Verdict, and it's got 4 Karn the Great Creator, which I guess is in standard. But what is it doing here in this deck?
Yeah, the cards you can fetch out of the sideboard with Karn are a Damping Sphere, a Glass Casket, Pithing Needle, Cataclysmic Gearhulk, a Darksteel Citadel if you need a land, Grafdigger's Cage, an Ornithopter, a Tormod's Crypt. So a lot of good targets based on what deck you're facing. Ornithopter is cute as you can get it immediately if you have a Lukka and immediately turn that into an agent if you need to. Tormod's Crypt obviously very good right now with how popular Lurrus decks are in the format. I like this deck.
Cage is a weird one because it also shuts off your Lukkas, but I guess just being able to wish for it, there's probably scenarios where it still works out.
Yeah, I mean, and this build of the deck is a little less focused on turning a small creature into an agent. The standard versions of this deck all play 3 or 4 agents of treachery, while this deck is only playing 2. So you're not really reliant on that end game. Perhaps the sweetest thing in this 75 are the 2 Void Winnower in the sideboard. It's not really a card I thought would ever see constructed play, but here we are.
The companions, I mean, it has some potential.
Yeah. Really funny card to think about. Moving down this top 8, this deck is really interesting. It's by Flabbergasted, 4th place. Jeskai Cycling, I guess. You have 4 Flourishing Fox and 2 Nimble Obstructionist as the creatures. And then a bunch of cycling instants. You have Censor, Hieroglyphic Illumination, Neutralize. And then 4 Cast Out, 4 Shark Typhoon, 4 Azorius Charm, 2 Supreme Verdict, and then 4 Zenith Flare with 24 lands. This deck also a companion deck playing Zerda the Dawnwaker. This one is really cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it's as well. Some of these cycling cards cost more than just cycle 1, like Neutralize cost 2. So like the Zerda might actually be useful. It turns your Nimble Obstructionist just into Stifle instead of like a 3-mana Stifle. But I kind of feel like the Zerda's there just because it's the only companion that works with this deck. But still really cool. Like more of a controlling plan with like counter spells and stuff, and it could play towards Shark Typhoon. But it could also just like have a Flourishing Fox start and kill you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting take on a cycling strategy with the Zenith Flare endgame. And I like how this deck is set up. It's really interesting.
Just on paper too, it looks like it would be much more interesting to play than the standard version because a lot of these cards, like, you might want to cast at some point. You may want to censor what your opponent's doing. you may want to cast something out that's like a problem. Whereas a lot of the inclusions, especially a lot of the 1-mana cyclers in the standard deck, you're never playing. There's no choice there. You just cycle them when you have them.
Exactly. Like, I feel like this deck plays a lot more like a tempo deck rather than just kind of an all-in, linear cycling monstrosity.
Yeah,
you don't deck with Fox.
Yeah, you don't just turn off and cycle until you win. You can actually play the game here, kind of in the traditional sense.
Yeah. I imagine this deck might play a little bit like a Delver deck. I don't know if I'm crazy thinking that, but just like looking at it and kind of thinking about how it might play out.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a weird new archetype, so maybe comparisons to existing decks aren't particularly good. But like, yeah, I can see the argument that Fox plays like Delver, like it's just 1-mana efficient threat that you can like protect and support.
You just have Zenith Flare to turn the corner whenever you need to.
Yeah, like someone else might say that this deck plays like Twin because of Zenith Flare. Like you just play a controlling plan and like, play your cantrips. And then if your opponent taps out, you just play your 4-mana win card and kill them.
Yeah, I wonder if how good this deck actually is. But I guess we'll keep an eye to see across top 8, see if this deck continues to put up results. But it's definitely a cool new one to keep an eye on. Moving down, we have another burn deck. Then 6th place, Scales. Scales is a deck that has just kind of been around since the beginning of the format. Nothing from Scales has been banned, and it hasn't really changed much since the format started. This build in particular, the earliest builds of Scales in Pioneer, were playing Steel Overseer, and then they kind of warped into Llanowar Elf, Elvish Mystic, Vivian Arcbow Ranger decks, and moved away from the all-in kind of artifact game plan. This one's makes sense that we're back to that, as the Ozolith is a pretty good new addition from Ikoria. It plays a lot better with this general game plan.
Hell yeah. I was so big on this card at the beginning when standard. I tried to brew that. I mean, it's not possible in standard, but you love to see it doing work out here in Scales.
Yeah, and we've brought back the old standard tech from green-white tokens of Evolutionary Leap. Plays incredibly well with your hanger back walkers.
Well, and with your Ozolith, like Evolutionary Leap plus Ozolith does a pretty good Arcbound Ravager impersonation, allowing you to redistribute and manage your +1/+1 counter resources like in really crafty ways, I imagine, to kill in combat or add to your ballista to, ping them out, etc.
Yeah, and naturally, I didn't mention this yet, but this is a Lurrus deck. Of course, all of these cards play fantastic with Lurrus, so natural fit there. Then this might be my favorite deck of the entire top 8. X-File, 7th place, playing Jund Lurrus. This one, I don't know. This one just rubs me the right way. 2 Cheville, Bane of Monsters. I love this card.
Oh, yeah. This deck is sweet. Alerting all mid-range fans. If you want to still play busted companions in Lurrus, but you like junding and mid-ranging, this is the deck for you.
Yeah, we have 4 Unbridled Growth in the deck, which does I joked about this in the pre-show, but it's the poor man's Mishra's Bauble, the Pioneer Mishra's Bauble, you could say, for repeatable card draw with Lurrus in the late game. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about this deck that I really like.
It's hard not to love a Satyr Wayfinder deck. Just dump stuff into the graveyard, cast it again with Lurrus, make some huge Grim Flayers attack. Who knows? Grind them out somehow.
Yeah, it lets you play the lower land count, only 23 lands in this deck. I mean, like, nothing in your deck costs more than 3 mana outside of the Escape on Kroxa, but there's a lot to like here. I think this deck's interesting, and this looks like to me the kind of deck that good players would gravitate to. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, lots of decisions, lots of interaction, tons of ways to take different lines to win. I mean, this is it's just the mid-range dream, right? I mean, in a format that's really fast with companions, but you can still sort of play that game plan here, which is nice to see for sure.
And rounding out this top 8, we have another sweet one, a Yorion deck, 80 cards, black-white, Doom Foretold. Obviously, all of the cards in this deck play fantastic with Yorion, so not a surprise to see this build of the deck. 4 Demonic Pact as well. That also another card that plays really well with Yorion. That's interesting.
Plays really well with Yorion and with Doom Foretold itself. Like, you just sack it before you lose, or you flicker it to keep getting more triggers.
Yeah, this deck is awesome. This deck is so sweet. This is the kind of thing I wanted Pioneer to be. So it's nice to see all these Yawgmoth Will Storm decks not completely ruin the format. So
didn't even
Gideon of the Trials.
Yeah,
You can emblem Gideon of the Trials to let the Demonic Pact not kill you. Is that correct?
correct. Yeah.
Ooh, that's a nice combo.
Yeah. Also, I didn't even notice this the first time I looked at the list, but 4 Flicker of Fate in this deck as well makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's actually really cool.
Yeah, that wraps up the Pioneer top 8. I know we don't talk about Pioneer much, but yeah, all of those decks were just really, really sweet. And I felt like
That was an exceptional selection of interesting decks.
Yeah, we'd be doing a disservice to our listeners if we didn't take a little bit of time during today's show to talk about them. So we can move along now to our topic of the day. Cam, you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, so this is where Adam is going to elaborate on red-white cycling as he said he would, because Adam had to kind of change the way he was thinking about playing the deck during our Versus stream. He was like losing some pre-board games, just doing medium with it. And then our friend Dylan was in Twitch chat and he had played the deck a bunch, and we started thinking about like other potential goals of how the deck could be played. And once Adam shifted his play style to match that, I don't think he lost another game with the deck. So it's kind of, our topic is about finding these paradigm shifts when your play isn't working, and like being aware of when you might be stuck in a certain paradigm, with some examples of when that's happened, and just like what it looks like to have the wrong goals unknowingly for certain decks or strategies in Magic.
Yeah, no kidding. I was like pretty tilted by it at first because I thought I was playing fine. I thought the lines I was taking would be completely reasonable, and like there's no world in which you wouldn't sort of play in the style I was playing, but I was just wrong. Like I was just stone wrong. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, so maybe you could briefly explain, what was the style you were playing initially?
Well, I was just trying to grind out value with, the 2-mana 3/1 that makes a 1/1. I also kind of punted and didn't cycle on my opponent's turn at one point, but I mean, that's not the end of the world. But you don't actually want to just win through sort of value on the board. I mean, it's a lot of matchups. You actually just cycle just every single card you see and then just kill them with Zenith Flare. Because a lot of decks game one don't have a way to interact and stop you from doing that. Post-board, yeah, obviously things are going to change and you have to figure that out. And that's the biggest weakness of the deck, is that post-board you can't play that plan. But probably the strongest plan game one, apart from like if you have it on turn 2 or you have the turn 1 Fox, is to just, if you don't have those, you just go all in on cycling and just hoping Zenith Flare is enough. And against a lot of matchups, it is game one. It's so powerful and so linear that people can't really interact with it. And it felt so wrong to me to play towards that. And when I switched, it just changed everything. And the matchup just felt completely different.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The idea that it felt wrong and that you were getting tilted with the deck. This is something I've seen happen occasionally to Magic players, but it happens actually to everybody in any part of life all the time. We just naturally fit our experiences into sort of the theory we have about how things work, into our preconceived assumptions. So when you play a deck how you think it should be played and you lose, you don't question that you have the wrong goal. It's not the first thing you question. Usually you hear people say the deck must be bad because what it's doing doesn't win, or this must be a bad matchup because the way this deck plays doesn't win in this matchup, or maybe I just got unlucky and the deck didn't do what it was supposed to. And it's not often that people just realize that they were playing towards the completely wrong goal, because that's what you were thinking, I assume, when you were getting tilted there, Adam, that this deck must not be good, it must not have enough lands, it must just be high roll draft commons. If playing to the board and cycling and getting synergy from cycling isn't what doesn't win, that seems like what the deck should do.
Yeah, that's absolutely was frustrating for me. And I just didn't realize that that's not actually the primary goal of the deck. It's not, at least game one, that isn't really your plan. I mean, post-board games, it can still be your plan. But yeah, I just completely sort of misread the intention of the cards in the deck. This is one of the problems of not building a deck by yourself. When you pick up other decks, you sort of have to think about the intention of the card. Why is this here? What's its purpose? What am I doing with this deck? And the intention of the deck. And I just didn't really think about it that much. And I had these, preconceived, ideas about how it ought to play out, how Magic generally ought to operate. And I was mistakenly applying it to this deck. And it was definitely costing me games.
I actually would have thought the exact same thing as you. And I think I played the cycling deck a bit just casually on ladder, and I was playing it the same way you were, like, trying to get pings with my Draenei Stingers, trying to attack with the 1/1s off of Valiant Rescuer, until I was playing a different deck and I faced a cycling opponent on ladder. And I assumed that they were just like really dumb and bad because they spent all of their turn 3 cycling 3 cards and they had no board. Then they spent all of their turn 4 cycling 4 cards and they still had no board. And they were just literally cycling everything. They were cycling foxes. They were cycling stingers. They were cycling things that I assumed they needed to play to win. And then I just died to a Zenith Flare. And they kept like spamming good game as they cycled every turn. So that was also tilting.
Yeah, I have emotes off actually, which is, I don't know how I feel about it. I've just been experimenting with emotes off, just trying to recenter my assumptions,
Yeah, but like it's instructive that because my opponent was spamming good game, usually people do this like when they're going to win. Like it's rare that they spam good game and then they lose. It's usually because they get surprised by something. So that means that they understood that they were going to win and that they knew they were playing well, even if I didn't. So like from that, I can like understand that they were playing with the correct goal. Like they weren't hesitant that they were doing anything wrong. They were just spamming good game at me. So that's how it was, like from that match that I actually assumed that maybe you can just only play to Zenith Fair. And then I started talking about it during the verses. And then, yeah, you switched to doing that. Like if you lost board early, if your first Fox got answered, you just gave up on playing to the board, cycled everything and Zenith Flared people.
Yeah, in game 1, it felt like incredible. Yeah, post board again, graveyard interactions. Played a brew which had Ashiok, which just smashed my entire deck, shuts me off. I can't play. So Zenith Flare, loses to things like that post board. But game 1, it's not even close. It's a free win against the sort of fairer decks, right? Like that strategy that I switched to once we sort of realized and you gave me the advice to switch my play style and just view the deck completely differently, which I didn't want to. It was really tilting to play like that, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it's like and so that's basically the topic. Like there are decks and there are situations in Magic where like the obvious goal of what you think you should be doing with most of your experience in Magic isn't going to be correct. And it's going to feel wrong. It's going to feel unnatural when people tell you what you should be doing. I've probably experienced this before and not even realized it or remembered it, where someone told me like, hey, you probably should have done this. And I just assumed that they're wrong and bad because it seems so wrong. But with these wacky oddball decks, like I don't think you could call cycling a traditional Magic deck. Like it plays in a really weird way. I guess it's then not surprising that the goals you should have with these decks are weird and unconventional.
Yeah, for sure. And just adapting even to that way of thinking through a deck can be really difficult. This topic was actually kind of inspired from a really boring, repetitive task I was doing, and thinking about something in that. This is really dry, but I was editing an article for a European journal, my own article to send to a journal that's European. And they use APA formatting. And here in NA, for some, not all, I'm used to using MLA formatting. And it like warped my way of seeing papers, and it was very annoying and tedious. And it just made me think about the ways in which, it's still the same information, just sort of relayed and played differently. And it made me think about the ways in which, Magic games sort of play out in similar ways, right? You have to sort of reorganize information in some ways for how you think about sort of approaching these matchups. And it was pretty enlightening to see it that way. And I have a new, I dislike the play style of the deck, but that's irrelevant to this sort of discussion about how you view the deck and how it should operate and what its plans are. And yeah, sometimes it can be hard to really break that way of thinking about how something should be done and go through and completely change, your sort of formation and management of any system can be really difficult. And in Magic, it's really, really difficult. And you don't even see people really talking about it. Like, well, no, you just have to play completely differently. This is, a different style than what you'd even imagine. So,
yeah. And I think you don't see people talk about it like directly that often because it doesn't actually come up that often. I think most decks, sort of your plug and play approach, your understanding, if you just look at the list, is like usually right because, most Magic cards play in a similar way. Like you can tell when a deck is mid-range, you can tell when it's aggressive. So that's probably why it doesn't come up. But I think a more subtle instance of this that does come up a lot and people don't talk about it is in developing sideboard strategies. I think people link sideboard strategies to opposing decks a bit too much rather than linking it to the pair of their deck and the opponent's deck. This was actually something Stelly had mentioned, but for example, playing against fires, maybe you've had success in the past playing things like Brontodon or playing things like Disenchant to limit their use of Fires of Invention itself. And so you just assume that, enchantment removal is good against fires. And that becomes your paradigm. And then you pick up some other list in colors that have access to enchantment removal. So you add some into the sideboard for fires. And there it doesn't work. There could be a ton of different reasons why it's not working. Maybe the deck you picked up is incredibly aggressive and drawing enchantment removal early, isn't relevant at the points in the game where you're powerful or dilutes your game plan too much. But I think this is the common occurrence of this topic is, not realizing that your goals in sideboarding could be completely wrong for the deck you're playing.
Yeah, and you can kind of take this way of thinking when it comes to sideboarding beyond just how you approach certain matchups, even break it down to something as simple as picking up a deck for the first time and playing with a sideboard guide you were given by your friend or you bought online or whatever. You can think about, okay, this sideboard plan is a good baseline to follow sometimes, but it's not always correct to follow it for that specific matchup in every scenario. You have to be constantly kind of thinking about what your opponent is doing and adjusting your sideboard plan that you have you're bringing forth in your sideboard based on what they're doing. So just because my piece of paper here says you always cut these X cards and you always bring in these X cards, you have to kind of think beyond that and beyond this kind of, I guess, paradigm you've conceived for this certain matchup based on your sideboard plan. And I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but
no, yeah, I get it. It makes sense. Yeah, I think it makes sense that a lot of the times, it requires this really sort of odd way of thinking about the game that you're not used to, and that can be really strange to go into it, and it's something that can be really difficult, even from years of playing.
And it's particularly hard to notice when this is happening, and it's something that you usually only notice after the fact when there's this flash of inspiration or someone thinks of some different way to approach a matchup and suddenly shows everyone what's correct. It isn't until that happens that everyone realizes they were wrong. I don't know if there's any way from within to figure out that your goals are wrong.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of the Versus series and streaming. One of the things I need to get better at in Magic, and that probably everyone needs to get better at, is this sort of, really, it sounds bad, but this pretentious assumption of that, I'm right, I know what I'm doing, I'm pretty good, this deck's easy, and then not thinking about its sort of intricacies, and I wasn't playing the cycling deck correctly because of it. And so having that advice and having somebody from outside say, no, you're not doing this right, and rethinking that and revisiting those things can be really helpful for improving your overall game and understanding of Magic. Letting go of that sort of, I don't want to say pride, but yeah, it probably is.
Yeah. And I guess it's some pride when you pick up decks that you assume should be good, and you have this combination of I play well and this deck has done well, so it should do well. That makes for really frustrating experiences. That's an experience I've had picking up Jeskai Fires, and then the deck doesn't work. I still don't know what I'm doing wrong. It must be something, but that's the frustration I have. This deck does well, and I have done well in the past, so how come I can't do well with this deck? And it's something about the way I'm approaching it not meshing. And I find that I don't have that experience with brews, because when I'm brewing something, my pride is allocated differently. I'm willing to make changes to make the deck work. I'm not stuck on a brew the way I am stuck on a net deck. And so because I'm willing to make changes, I find myself testing different approaches in brews. And so I don't get stuck in one paradigm.
Yeah, for sure. That makes tons of sense. Yeah. It's tough though. It's really difficult. I think it's one of probably the harder parts about playing new decks, right? Is this assumption of exactly what you mentioned, right? Well, this deck's good. It won a tournament. I should just be out here getting Mythic on ladder, no problem, but I can't buy a goddamn win,
Yeah. And I guess our next example of an archetype or a deck that has happened for a lot, and I guess it happened to other people, and we've mentioned this deck a lot on the podcast because it's our pride and joy. But in what format was this? Anyway, in red-black aggro standard format, Adam and I built a black-white tokens deck, sort of a prison black-white tokens with Anointed Procession and Hidden Stockpile. And we gave it to a bunch of people because we were doing quite well with it and we thought it was very strong. And like everyone told us it was bad. Everyone tried to make changes to like the deck. Everyone like couldn't do well with it.
Well, yeah, because it was a chain whirler meta, guys. Can't play tokens in a chain whirler meta.
Yeah, and everybody would make changes and cut these cards that were just the cornerstone of the deck that Cam and I, after hours of testing and play patterns, had made these decisions, and people would just immediately, without even playing the deck, cut them and change them without considering why. And then I watched them play, and their play style was just radically different from mine. They were prioritizing things I would never care about. And I realized, like, oh my God, it's not the deck. It's just a pilot programming error. We're all, and I wonder, I can't help but think, like, yeah, obviously we're giving this deck a sort of shout out from whatever way back, but yeah, the skeptical mind, wonders, like, how often am I doing this with decks? Like, am I playing them, sort of in the wrong sequential order? Am I prioritizing the wrong removal, wrong threats? Like, how easy is it to do that? Considering the deck I knew, built, and played probably better than most people. Whenever I watched them play, I couldn't believe how they were playing. And I imagine somebody like Hemsley, one of the sort of pioneers of a deck like Scales, has the same experience watching people play Scales. He probably can't even believe what people are doing. Like, he can't fathom that these people are making the decisions and lines they are doing. And it's just a matter of understanding sort of what the deck is supposed to be doing and in what circumstances. And I wonder how much that affects your play, thinking about the sort of intentionality of what a deck is actually doing versus what you think its cards should do, and why it's good in the meta. It's really difficult to outline those things. And that just is something I'm hoping that just playing more on Twitch, playing the Versus series, playing more Magic online with people, having the Discord community and everything will help me improve at that kind of thing,
Yeah, and I guess that's like the point of having this as our topic this episode, is just to like #raise awareness so that people don't immediately assume, the things we said, that like the deck must be bad, or, maybe it's a bad matchup, that you're just aware that like this could be an option. It could be that you're completely misunderstanding how the deck should be played. And like going back to black-white tokens, I don't fault anyone for not playing it correctly when we handed it to them, because as Adam said, we spent a lot of time to realize how it should be played. Like, we were playing it wrong initially at first, and like very gradually we figured out what we should be doing. Like, even with our own deck, I think the example that stands out is it seemed powerful. We thought there was something there, but we were kind of struggling in the red-black matchup, which is a death knell in that format because it was everywhere, until we realized that we had this assumption from the format, which was that in any other matchup of any other two decks in that format, you would always save Vraska's Contempt for Hazaret. It was one of the only ways to answer it, and Hazaret was just such a powerful threat that would end games that you had to get it off the board. Oftentimes, I think people would joke, like, who drew more did they draw more Hazarets than you drew Contempts? Like, okay, then they win, or vice versa. So we had Contempt in the deck, and we were contempting Hazarets. And then we would just kind of like lose to other things, and we would think, okay, maybe we don't have enough answers. Like, we have to contempt Hazaret, but then these Glorybringers are killing us. Until one day maybe it was by happenstance. Maybe there was a game where we just didn't draw a Contempt and our opponent had a Hazaret. And because of this, we were forced to play without contempting Hazaret. And we realized that it wasn't actually that much of an issue. It can't get past the 1/1s. We're gaining more life than they can ping us with discards. And from then on, we just never contempted another Hazaret, only saved them for things that were actually killing us, like Glorybringer. And I don't think that matchup was ever an issue again. We just smashed it every time we played from then on.
Yep, not even close. It was super easy. And it was just iterations over and over of gameplay of the same pattern over and over, and just approaching it a little bit differently every single time. As we tuned the deck, as we made changes to the deck, we completely reordered our thinking about how the deck should even play out, what cards mattered. So it wasn't even just about like changing cards in the deck, although we did do that as well. It was also about sort of reorienting our thinking about the deck and how the deck should function in the matchup. And that completely opened the floodgates for the damage that deck could do. Like a couple weeks after this, I would undefeated a PTQ. You know what I mean? Playing only against quote unquote its bad matchup and quote unquote the best deck in the format. You know what I mean? And I just absolutely pounded them because I understood this sort of perspective change that we had worked on. And I wonder how much you can unlock with that sort of thinking about matchups in Magic.
Probably a ton. But I think the other takeaway from that example is that, like, it's not even I mean, maybe I'll think about it more now, but it's not even something we were thinking we were trying to do. Like, it just came by happenstance, these sort of revelations and this enlightenment. Like, it was by accident that we had to play against Hazaret without a contempt, and then it went okay. Like, we didn't even think to consider, like, is there a way we can play against Hazaret without contempt? It was just so ingrained in, like, that format.
The Bob Ross revelation, a happy little accident.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, like, maybe I'll be looking for these things more now, but in general, that's usually how it happens, is that it just sort of, you stumble upon something that works and then you realize, oh, wait, like, this is super easy now.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you can't force it. It's just a revelation over time, right? Something that just gets ingrained in play patterns over time, for sure. I mean, there are think about the decks like Stally with Tron, right? Modern. It's like he knows, like he like the lines people would take that they think Tron is like, oh, you don't have to think, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not true. Like, the way Stally approaches matchups and plays Tron, mulligan decisions, all these things are just years of iteration of understanding, like, what the matchup looks like, what you're going for, how you should function, right? It completely warps your understanding of the matchup. And I bet even Stally, like, watching other people play Tron, just face palming.
Yeah, it's funny you're saying this, and all I can think about is this meme Hemsley showed me one time. You know that meme template of the guy that's slowly putting on clown makeup?
Oh, yeah.
I love one of the best meme formats of all time.
Yeah, and it was just a meme of, like, the text was just talking about how Tron was intricate, and with each one, it was like, oh yeah, Tron's actually very intricate. It takes a lot of thought going into every turn and thinking out plays, and just each one was, the guy with more clown makeup on. That's all I could think about while you were talking about how intricate Tron can be.
Well, it's not intricate in the traditional sense that we're thinking of, but there are sort of play patterns that you have to reorient yourself to from other decks, right? That's what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah, exactly. Like one example that pops out to me just off the top of my head when it comes to playing Tron is which sequence of lands you search out based on which lands your opponents are targeting. And really, the biggest paradigm you have to consider when playing Tron is just your mulligan decisions and how you view mulliganing.
But yeah, that's what I mean about sort of just thinking about how you should play the matchup for these in these really weird ways that a lot of people wouldn't have thought about. Not saying that the deck or whatever, any deck, that's not really right. That it's, this really complex deck is really difficult to play. It's more so that you just have to reorient your thinking about how you should be playing the matchup, and sometimes it can completely warp things. I mean, how many games of Tron have you won where you change this whatever approach or method you're taking, and then all of a sudden the matchup becomes a lot more bearable. Tron might be a bad example because it's such a sort of powerful top end linear strat that it doesn't have the same sort of edges that other decks do, but it still probably does in cases, right?
I think it's probably still a good example, and we could compare it to the cycling example we were talking about earlier, in that, like, it's not a hard decision to make, but it's just like an unusual decision. So, like, you thought in cycling that you couldn't just cycle the Zenith Flare, but it turns out you could. I think a lot of people who pick up Tron think that I can't just mull to a hand that gets Tron because, like, my win rate in traditional decks with 4 or 5 cards is so low that, like, it must be the same here. And it's not like a difficult decision to make. It's just an unusual one that people feel is wrong until they learn it's not.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the best example you can go to when it comes to talking about Tron. In this example is your mulligan strategies and how mulligan decisions apply with that specific deck. And you just got to think about things completely different when mulliganing while playing Tron than you would playing other decks in the format.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, any other thoughts on this topic? I think it's a pretty interesting topic. I think it's a really enjoyable way to view Magic and think through the game and think through decks. I think it adds a whole bunch of depth and possible layers to the game and to choosing what decks you play, and you can play them with a little more intentionality, I guess, as opposed to just sort of thinking, I know how to play them, which is what I feel like I was doing on the Versus thing, and I'm not really happy with that, and I played I haven't been playing probably nearly as well as I could be because of that sort of being stuck in a loop as far as thinking about how I should play out matches. And I wonder how much that's costing me. So I'm really glad we got to talk about this topic today and do the Versus series last night, because I think it was really good for my gameplay overall and thinking through the game. And it's one of the first times in a long time I've really thought about it like that. And I think it's a really helpful way for me. So
yeah, I guess it's just like a slight shift in how you approach things. Like rather than saying, oh, I'm going to take Green Red Fires because it did very well at the DWC Take Our Money, and I'm going to go smash ladder with it because it's a good deck and it won. I mean, that might happen, but you can change your intention very slightly by just saying, this deck did well at this tournament. I'm going to take it on ladder and learn why it did well. Like, I'm going to see how it should be played rather than just expecting to smash with it because it's a good deck.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's wrap this thing up. Thank you all for joining the club this week. Make sure, as always, you check out wizardtower.com for all your Magic single needs. Get those pre-orders for Ikoria in. If you want to support the show, you can find us on Patreon, patreon.com/DWC Podcast. Be sure to mark your calendars for every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, DWC Versus over at twitch.tv/Disorganized Wizards Club. And head over to MTG Melee and sign up for the next DWC Organizational, which is coming on Sunday, May 17th. Free event, prizes for top 16, first place, box of Ikoria Layer Behemoths. All the coverage is going to be streamed over on our Twitch channel. Definitely sign up while you still can. Thank you all for listening. We'll catch you all next week.
Later.